earth. Do you remember? Why have we taken birth? Do you remember?
Lovely. I love the cape too. Isn't that a cool cape? This is right. Good morning. So, my talk topic for today was supposed to be the way of wisdom, which is one of the Emma Curtis Hopkins books that we're just kind of working our way through. And then along came Holly Day and said, you know, I've got these kind of shadow songs I want to sing this day. And then along came Deb Black, who said, I want to leave up some of the decorations, including the haunted forest from the dinner last night. And then along came my wife, who said, you really shouldn't do the Halloween talk after Halloween, which is the Halloween talk is things that go bump in the night. And so I decided to pursue the way of wisdom and listen to them. So today we're doing next week's talk, and next week we'll do today's talk. Are you with me? Okay. So we'll look at way of wisdom next week, but today we're going to look at things that go bump in the night. And as you know, we're normally a happy, happy, joy, joy church. In fact, we're sometimes accused of being too much that, right? Oh, all is good. Everything's just wonderful. And so I wanted to take a look today because it's important sometimes to look at the shadows in our lives, stare them in the face, declare the untruth of them, right? From just that beautiful song that you just had. Before I get into the actual talk, however, that I wrote today, there is a shadow that we're, as a community, facing, and I wanted to just talk about that because it's going bump in the night for some of us, and that has to do with the finances of the center. And so, as you know, I normally do not get up and talk about the finances of the center, except like once a year, right? And so, if you'll bear with me for just a minute, there's going to be a brief little thing. But I also feel it's very important for you to know just where we're at. And where we're at is we're running about $14,000 in the red so far for the year. So if you'll take a breath with me, that's just a condition, that's an effect, that's what's happening out here on the shadow side of what's going bump in the night. Reverend Mary alluded to the fact that we are cutting back on the hours. We're going to be closed on Fridays, and that is because the entire staff, myself included, from me right down to where is she? Judy Preble right there, have taken a 10% cut in pay. And so we're doing that to try and be good stewards of the money that we have. Last month, we were $4,000 short on the amount of money that was pledged to us for the month. And some of you who may have received a letter to that effect if you're pledgers with us. But I just wanted to invite you to take a look at just where you're at with the finances. If you need financial support, the ministers and the practitioners would love to be in support of you and prayer with you to know your highest and greatest prosperity. If you're unhappy about something with the church, come and talk to me. Come and talk to any of the board members. We've got Deb out there on the board desk. I know Cher is on the board right here. Sherry Miller's in the back there. And so we've got 3 board members right here. Or of course, come and talk to myself. Come and talk to me about something. But I just wanted to say it's like we need to reconnect with that source, because this church, this center is a divine idea in the mind of God. And I know that our true nature really is thriving, and I know that that's the truth of each of you. Each of you is a divine idea in the mind of God, and your true nature is thriving. So I just wanted to bring that back into alignment so we can go and play and carry out the vision of what we're here to do, which is to shift lives and to support people in having magnificent lives. So I just wanted to let you know where we're at with that. All right? That's a little shadow that goes bump in the night. Thank you. If this is your first time here, I'm not talking to you. Your presence here is enough. Thank you very much. So, the reading that we had from Ernest Holmes reminds us that there are things that lurk in our subjective minds. You encountered a few of those yourself, right? I know I have. And they move us out of alignment with Spirit. They move us out of alignment with the lives of harmony and love and joy and peace that we are really here to live. Some of these things that go bump in the night for us are individual things. They're individual personal beliefs. They're individual experiences that we've created some stuff around and carried forward. And some of them are universal in nature, or what we like to call in religious science race thought or race mind. And that is this surrounding consciousness around us. It's kind of the soup of what we're thinking in, and we're so used to it that we've grown up in it oftentimes, and we never question it. We don't even question it, and we just accept it. So I want to talk about one of those things that go bump in the nights. It's in our conscious general culture, just because a number of years ago I had a congregant in my previous church who had a serious accident and had kind of gotten pretty close to death. And he was talking to me afterwards, and he was still on some medications, but he was worrying about the lake of fire. I don't want to go to the lake of fire, Reverend David. I don't want to go to the lake of fire, and Armageddon and all this stuff. And I thought, wow, that's still in your consciousness after being in religious science for a number of years. And it made me realize that this book that this comes out of, which is the book of Revelation, is a book. How many of you are familiar with or have heard of the book of Revelation? A little bit, somewhat? Okay. How many of you have kind of considered it an unpleasant experience to encounter that book? Right? Good. And some of you are sitting there going, no, I've never had it. This doesn't relate to me. What I'm going to tell you is it is so deep in our culture, so deep in our general consciousness that yes, you have. And so I wanted to talk about that today because it's given us some wonderful gifts for our shadow side of our subconscious mind. It's given us the mark of the beast. You've heard of this? It's why you don't have 666 as your house address, right? I mean, worse than putting number 13 on the floors of a hotel. You don't have 666. It's given us the Whore of Babylon. It's given us the Battle of Armageddon. You've heard of that? Yeah? The end of the world. And the end of the world, that whole thing sets up the rapture. You've heard of that? Yes. That only started, by the way, about 150 or so years ago. The rapture. It was a Scottish minister who kind of created that, and it spread. Out of that also comes looking for signs and symbols of the end times. Right? The lake of fire, the apocalypse, the seven seals, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and finally the second coming. All of which delivers us a kind of a message that says, Jesus is coming soon, and you'd better be ready or you'll be in big trouble. Right? You've kind of gotten this. You know that there are people out there, you don't, but you know that there are people out there who tie into this a lot. Okay? And that this infuses a lot of what happens in our culture. And so we have a couple of messages, a couple of ideas from that. Number one, we get a really scary God. A scary God who would send anybody who doesn't believe in his son to this lake of fire for all of eternity to be tortured. And number two, we get the great warrior Jesus coming by with his sword and his armies and conquering everything that's not in alignment with his good. Warrior Jesus. Jesus himself never said that, right? He never conveyed anything like, he said, my kingdom is not of this earth. He was here to be a spiritual teacher, a spiritual leader. Okay? So this thing takes it in a completely different direction. And so we can laugh at this book, a lot of us do. We can attempt to ignore this book, even more people do. Do you know it's said that there's several surveys that said nearly 2/3 of all Americans believe Jesus is coming back. Not Christians, Americans, just everybody, across the board. Because it surrounds us in our culture and it is seeped into our subconscious beliefs in very subtle ways. So what I wanted to do is look at this book today and start to unravel some of the stuff and some of that lurky stuff. Would that be cool? Would that be? Yeah. For some of you, this may be an important thing. So we'll begin to look at that. And what I want to say about this look is it's going to be a very light look, because the truth is I could probably spend about a 10-week or 12-week class or maybe an entire year-long class just on the book of Revelation, because there's so much in it. There's so much symbology and so much richness in it. But we're going to just take a kind of a light 15 or 20-minute look. Okay? I want to start with a quote from a Bible scholar, Raymond Brown, who says, Revelation is widely popular for the wrong reasons. He says, for a great number of people read it as a guide to how the world will end, assuming that the author was given by Christ detailed knowledge of the future that he communicated in coded symbols. You know a few people who believe that, right? You've heard of them. So let's take a look. Apocalypse, that word, which is, this book is also called the Book of the Apocalypse. Apocalypse is simply a Greek word that means a revelation, an unveiling, a disclosure. Okay? If I reveal something to you, in the Greek that would be an apocalypse. It's not the end of the world, it's just a revealing, it's just an unveiling. You know, if we were up here to unveil, Paul's photographs when he does his art show, that would be in a way considered an apocalypse. Just a revealing, just showing that. It also describes a style of writing, however, that was popular for about 300 years in the Jewish community, from about 200 years before Christ's time to about 100 years afterwards. And this particular book was written in 95 AD, so about 95 years after Christ. To set the tone, in roughly 70 AD, the Romans had come through. They already ran Israel, but they got ticked off at the Israelites and they destroyed the temple. Okay, and the temple, the sacred temple in Jerusalem, was the center of their culture, the center of everything about them. It was their place where they connected with their God. And so they're still pretty angry, upset, hurt, and distraught, if you will, about this process. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we're going through this. So an apocalyptic style of writing gives us either a vision of a heavenly world, how it's going to be, or it gives us a vision of how God is going to come and kick out the evil worldly rulers that are ruling us right now. And there are a number of books in the Bible that are apocalyptic books. The most popular, the other biggest one is the book of Daniel. The last half of the book of Daniel, and if you read through it, it has a lot of the same imagery that the book of Revelation does, and that's because the book of Revelation borrows heavily from the book of Daniel. Something like 2/3 of it was made up of the books of Daniel, Psalms, and Ezekiel. And the reason the author could do that is because he's writing to a group of people in what's called Asia, and Asia at that time was considered just about anything east of Israel, okay? So when he's saying Asia, when it describes Asia in this book, we're not talking China or Japan or not even India. We're talking about just what we today might call the near Middle East. Okay, so just a little bit outside of that. However, the difference is that these people did not grow up Jewish. The people to whom he's addressing this didn't grow up Jewish, so they didn't have this history of these books. So he could pull new material from these old books. I do this all the time. I've written other sermons to my previous church, so every once in a while I pull a little material from and roll into this church. Because you're a new audience, right? And so it's fresh to you. A script writer who's never, who's writing for a TV show that's never been seen in a new market can pull material from his old stuff and pull it in. So this is, in a way, what the book of Revelations has done. It's borrowed heavily from these other books for its imagery. So there's several different ways we're going to look at of how you can read this book. The one that we hear about the most, because it's the most noisy out there, if you will, is what's called a futurist reading. And a futurist reading says all this stuff is about to happen. All this is going to happen in the future. And what this is based on is the idea that the Bible is infallible. There can be no mistakes in the Bible because the Bible is God's word. Number one. Number two, this event described has not yet happened, right? Okay. Therefore, now remember assumptions from our talk on the four agreements, making assumptions? Okay, two assumptions here. Therefore, this must be going to happen in the future. And so, this is where the whole thing that we're still living with and a whole lot of people are still talking about is based on. This is going to happen because it has to happen. So, the effects of this particular view of this book. Number one, the gospel, which means the good news. The gospel simply becomes not how can I follow the teachings that Jesus taught, the way that he taught to be, but rather the gospel is I have to believe in Jesus. I have to believe in Jesus in order to be saved from God's about to happen wrath. Okay? And the only way I can be saved is by strongly believing in Jesus, not necessarily trying to apply the teachings that he did, but by just believing in him. And what that does is it sets up a special group of believers who will be saved when this whole thing happens, right? And then they will look down at us as we're in the lake of fire, supposedly, going, yeah, told you so, we're right. Okay? That was supposed to be more of a laugh than you gave, but it creates a special, we're special. We're special consciousness. The second effect of this is life on earth isn't that important. Why? Because Jesus is about to come through and wipe it out anyway. So what the heck? Correct everything. So why bother with social justice? Why bother with the environment? Why bother with any of the issues that are facing our world today? Jesus is going to set it all straight. Yep. Oops. Number 3 effect of this, and by the way, number 1 and number 2 get together and say, let's start Armageddon. Let's start the process. Because we know we're going to heaven. Let's get it on, man. Okay? And so that's what there's actually people out there who are trying to do that right now. Number 3, we're constantly running around interpreting any current event as a sign or symbol of the end times. I'm sure that somebody interpreted Hurricane Patricia last Friday as some sort of a sign from God of the end is near. And we've all heard, what was it, May 21st of a few years ago, the world was supposed to end or the rapture was supposed to happen. As a friend of mine said, up until May 21st, you were all excited to be a Christian, and on May 22nd, you were kind of embarrassed about being that kind of a Christian, So, and by the way, not every Christian believes in this. This is just, some people do this, but have you noticed they tend to be loud and noisy about it? So that's number 3, is we're constantly interpreting and looking for signs and symbols of the end times. So we're not really seeing the world as it is today. We're trying to interpret it as what it's going to mean and when Jesus is coming back. And then number 4, finally, is it's all up to God anyway, so why bother? Why should I bother with this world? Why should I bother with my life? All I got to do is believe in Jesus long enough until he comes, and I'm good. There's nothing I can do. Kind of a fatalistic look at life, right? Yeah. So this is a worldview. This is a consciousness view, and the truth is, all of us have been infected by this to some little degree. At least a little bit of us has this in our mind, and unless we consciously bring it up to the surface and say, wait a minute, time out. This isn't the truth. Okay? We're still carrying it around with us. It's a little bit of a influenza virus. There's another view. You'll like this one better. It's called the historical view. That this work was written for the people of John's time. This book was written by John of Patmos. This book was written for the people of his time. And he says so. He specifically calls out 7 churches in what he calls Asia that he's writing this to. And he kind of countenances or talks about these churches. A couple of you have it together and you're doing great. Just kind of keep it up. A couple of you kind of backslide. And, you need to get it together. And a couple of you, man, you're about to fall off the edge of the earth. And unless you get it together, you're in deep trouble. And so this is who he's addressing this to. He names them in the opening. And he's trying to say that these are events that are going to happen in the lifetimes of these people. Several times in this book it says, many of you will not taste death until these events have unfolded. And it's really hard for me to understand how it is that today people can still be expecting that to happen when all those people have not only tasted death, but they're gone and have been for a long time. We'll get to that in a minute. So what he's trying to tell these churches is, and it's a good thing that he's trying to tell them, he's trying to tell them to keep the faith, to not give in to the temptation of going back to the Roman or looser lifestyle, but to walk in the Christian principle, to walk in the principles they believe in. Now, I tell you to do that every Sunday, right? But I don't tell you that Ernest Holmes is going to come back on a chariot of fire with a sword and wipe out all the non-religious scientists, right? Wouldn't that be fun? No, it wouldn't. Okay? But he's trying to say, keep the faith, persevere, Because God will soon act to overthrow the rule of Rome and the Caesars. Okay. Now, one of my favorite ways of viewing this is what he's basically, the way that the futurist people believe in it is, he's telling these 7 churches this: if you don't shape up, in 2,000 years, God's going to come and kick your you-know-whats. And especially those people over in the United States of America. Now, you may not know about the people in the United States of America right now. In fact, you think the world's flat with a dome over it. You don't even know there's a continent or two on the other side of the world. But Jesus is coming back in 2,000 years. Does that make sense? This is like you telling your kid, if you don't stop what you're doing, in 250 years, I'm going to spank you. Okay? Your kid's going to sit there and go, Mom, Dad, neither one of us is going to be around. Okay? John is not writing this to us. He's not writing this to a community that he didn't even know was going to exist 2,000 years down the road. He's writing it to the people of his time, trying to get them to turn around and trying to get them to repent, if you will, and move more back into alignment with their true ideals. And he's adding this high drama because this is what's going to happen, and eventually, we're going to triumph. We're going to triumph over these Romans. That's all he's trying to say. That's the historical view. Now, here's the problem with the historical view for some people. What this says is this is a mistaken or not a prophecy that doesn't occur, doesn't happen, doesn't get fulfilled. There's several of those in the Bible, by the way. There's a number of unfulfilled prophecies in the Bible. The challenge with it is, if I believe the Bible is infallible and it's the Word of God, but this prophecy doesn't happen, what does that leave me with? Gonna happen. But it leaves me, but if I say it ain't gonna happen because it didn't happen, it leaves me in a state of complete confusion. And I finally have to say, you know what, the Bible might be a product of human beings. It might have actually been written by people without a divine guarantee. And by the way, nowhere in the Bible does it say that it's infallible or written by God. The authors of each of the books of the Bible, and you may or may not know this, but each of the books was written independently, separately from each other. It was only after the printing press got invented in the 1400s that it all got jammed together. Okay? 800 years ago, 900 years ago, whatever it was, if you went into a particular church, they weren't holding, all the books of the Bible in one book that we have today. They would be focusing on an individual book and taking a look at that. That's how they were meant to be viewed. So the Bible is a product of human beings, and there's no divine guarantee. There is another view that we can view it with, and that's what I call the mythopoetic view. And that is to look at it as a tale of our spiritual journey. Have you noticed that your spiritual journey, and I know you're all on one because you're here, have you ever noticed that it has a few hardships along the way? Right? A few shadows, a few challenges along the way. And it has a few triumphs along the way too, doesn't it? Days where you sit there and go, wow, I got it. I had this breakthrough. I had this aha moment. I feel lighter than ever before, and you tend to not go back too far from that. So as we move forward in our spiritual journey, we're moving more and more from living in the world of effects to living in the world of cause, what we talked about last Sunday. And what that can be considered is moving from living in the world of Rome, which is the city of the world and effect, to living in the New Jerusalem, which is the world, God's city, Spirit's city, living in the world of cause, living in that world of true spirit. And most of us are going for that, right? That is what we're involved in. Ernest Holmes in that reading talks about how do we regain this lost paradise? Only through soul culture and careful self-analysis, which brings up something. So there's powerful imagery and mythology and symbology in this book. But don't get wrapped up in the symbology and the imagery of it. What's it trying to really say? It's trying to remind us to stay walking through the path on the journey, and sooner or later we will get to the New Jerusalem. We will all get there. That's what we teach. There's one little problem with the way, however, about this book, even in this kind of a viewpoint, and that is it taps into the ancient archetype of what's known as the cosmic combat. That up there in the heavens, there's a battle going on between good and evil. Okay? Whether it's, Michael and Lucifer, whether it's the Greek gods, Zeus and all the others having fights with each other, whether it's the Hindu gods, whether it's, there's this belief throughout our culture, the human culture, of a battle between good and evil. How many of you have noticed that? It's on just about every television show or movie you ever see. There's a good guy or gal and a bad guy or gal. And up until recently, the good guys always won. Then some directors wanted and screenwriters wanted to play with the darker side of that. You can solve any murder within an hour on TV, right? Get DNA testing back in 10 minutes? Wow, it's amazing. This battle of good and evil, this idea of the battle of good and evil lives in our subconscious mind and shows up everywhere. It's why so many people are so upset about politics right now, is it's seen as a battle of good and evil, out there personified. And who decides which is good and who decides which is evil is up to you. But it's seen as the battle of good versus evil. We love stories of the triumph of good, don't we? Don't we? But is the battle real? Is there really a battle of good and evil going on? We teach that God is love and only love. Is there a battle for good and evil going on in a field of infinite love and only love? No. So if we start to let go of this thing, this shadow that goes bump in the night that says we have to fight for the good and fight the evil, and simply start to say, what would happen if I called forth and simply became aware of and lived as the love, lived as the good? What if I didn't have to fight it? What if I didn't have to make it go away? What if, as Emma Curtis Hopkins says, its name is nothingness, no thingness? In other words, there's nothing there. What if I'm just fighting with a shadow within myself? Last week we talked about Emma talking about that we have a song of spirit within us. And if we will simply keep that song foremost in our mind, it will allow us to be and express who we truly are. There's no battle going on there, right? There's just keeping it foremost in our mind. Now sometimes it feels like a battle because we got these little thoughts that want to go nee. But all that really is can I just remember the truth of those? Can I love those, first of all? Can I even love my shadow side, right? Can I love the shadow? I created it. Or at least I accepted it from somebody else. It's part of who I am. Now, I may not choose to inhabit what it invites me to inhabit anymore, but can I love it, and can I live in a consciousness of an infinite love? Can I let go of, even within me, the battle of good and evil? The battle of Armageddon. So my invitation for you this week is to practice that. First of all, notice the themes from this story. Notice how they play out in your own life, and notice how you see them all around you. Some of you are very familiar with the story. Some of you, it's like you've never read the book, you don't even know the story, but you've heard some of those terms that we use. Just notice around you how often that idea is second coming, battle of Armageddon, the battle of good and evil, all this stuff is around you. Punishment of lake of fire. Secondly, notice where I have believed in a battle of good and evil within myself. Become aware of that. Just notice this week. Do I have to fight aspects of myself? Or can I just love those aspects? Doesn't mean I have to give them power, but can I just love them? And then thirdly, begin to remember that God is good and only good. God is love and only love. That this thing that we're talking about, that we don't have to fight for, we don't have to fight anything against it, we just get to inhabit what's already there. The truth is, we already live in the New Jerusalem. We're there now. And all we're doing is waking up to the fact that we're already there now. That's different than a battle for good and evil, right? It's a completely different energy. Would you like to wake up with me? Yeah. So play with this week. Notice the themes all around you, just become aware of them. Notice where it is within me. And finally begin to remember that God is good and only good. God is love and only love. And I'm immersed in that. I'm going to close with a story that I read a couple weeks ago, but it's a powerful story and perfect for this, and so I'm going to repeat myself. This is called The Gates of Hell. A man was searching for that which cannot be found, when suddenly he arrived at the gates of hell. He was about to enter when he was stopped by an old magician. "You have no weapons," said the magician. "Take this sword. It will protect you from the evil forces that lie within." "I do not believe in evil forces," said the man, "so I have no need of weapons." "Only a warrior can enter the gates of hell," said the magician, slowly drawing the sword from its scabbard. And as he did so, a terrible demon appeared before him. "Behold the power of the sword," said the magician, and with one swift blow he killed the demon. "Now will you take the sword?" he asked. The man shook his head. "Are you blind?" asked the magician. "Can you not see that with this sword the demon was slain?" "Are you blind?" replied the man. "Can you not see that with this sword the demon was created?" And he walked past the magician through the gates of hell as if they existed only as an illusion in the minds of men. Our things that go bump in the night exist only as an illusion in our own minds. But when we stop believing the illusion, when we stop feeding the illusion, they simply fall away into the nothingness that they truly are. So join me in prayer. As I remember this truth, that there is love and only love, that there is good and only good, joy and only joy, an infinite bliss that every mystic has touched, that is beyond all of the shadows, all the stuff of the world. This is all there is. Whether we call it God, whether we call it the Tao, whether we call it Vishnu, whether we call it Allah, whether we call it Adonai, whether we call it Great Spirit, whatever name we give it, it is all that exists. It is the only thing there ever has been. It's the only thing there ever will be. This infinite one expresses itself as each of us, individually. Just an expression of itself. So we already are the love. We already are the bliss. We already are the joy. We already are this good. We are that, just simply because we are. And so I speak my word that each of us today remembers this truth more deeply than ever before, awakens into the love that we already live in the city of the New Jerusalem in which we already walk. Whether we call it heaven as earth or anything else, it is that consciousness of pure love, of pure joy. We're already there. We're already there. And so we open to that joy. We awaken to that joy. We talk about this time of Halloween as being a time when the veil is thin. What if the veil was so thin that we could walk right into that city consciously? The city that we already inhabit. The consciousness that we already inhabit. So we let go of the shadows. We let go of the things that go bump in the night. We recognize that all there is an infinite love, pure, whole, perfect, complete, just like we are. And so for each of us who remembers this truth, for each of us as we awaken to this truth, whatever level of awakening we already are and already doing, I'm ever so grateful. For this infinite love itself, I'm ever so grateful. And so in that gratitude, I release this word into a law that moves it into form, moves it into an expression in the most beautiful and perfect ways possible in our lives, each of our lives, right here and right now. And it does, because that is the nature of that law. That is the nature of the universe, is that we are waking up. We are remembering this truth. We are the universe remembering who it is. And so we simply say together, and so it is. Blessing.